Three, two, one, here we go. RAINMAN'S Take podcast. Observations on the world we live in. My take on current events and other topics of interest. Also interviews with some really cool people. So let's get the conversation going. Hey, everybody, it's the Rain Man. Thanks for tuning in. Today's episode 41 is some discussions on some of the media activities that we've been seeing over the last few weeks. 3 points I want to touch on today. The first one is New York Governor Cuomo's ever expanding problems that he's currently having with not only his alleged sexual harassment allegations, but also the alleged COVID-19 nursing home death numbers cover up. And it seems that, up until the last few days, the mainstream media outlets have not been covering these stories, or if they have, it's been very grudgingly, except now that more information is coming out. It's almost like they're being forced to have to cover it. So that's the first one I want to talk about. The second one I want to talk about is the push currently from several Democratic politicians in D.C. to have Fox News, One American News Network, and Newsmax removed from cable TV packages. And to me, that is just that's just censorship and worse, and it's definitely a scary trend that we're seeing, especially in what's supposed to be a republic that believes in freedom of speech and freedom of expression. And essentially, they're trying to push through legislation to remove any argument from the other side, to stop any debate about the things that are currently going on. And then finally, just briefly, I want to touch upon how the media has been handling the Texas weather crisis that they went through a couple of weeks ago, and just the energy debacle that turned out to be. So those are the 3 main points I want to talk about today. First, Governor Cuomo's treatment by the mainstream media. It seems like only now, after I think it's three women have come forward saying that they were sexually harassed by him, and then also the nursing home scandal that seems to be mushrooming as well. It seems like now that all of that information's out there, and now that all of the it seems like the loudest voices are actually coming from his party, from the Democrats in New York. Now that all of this is really coming to a head and really can't be ignored anymore, the mainstream media is actually starting to report on it, and it's all over the news now. But my big take is where have they been for the last few months? And I'll give you just a couple of examples of what I'm talking about. There was an article from Newsbusters on March 1st. The title of the article was "The Media's Shameful Cover-Up of Andrew Cuomo's Nursing Home Scandal." And this was from Rich Noyes and Bill D'Agostino from the Media Research Center, talking about how the media has handled, in particular, the nursing home scandal. In the past and I'm quoting the article here, in the past 4 weeks, January 28th to February 25th, ABC World News Tonight has devoted exactly 2 minutes, 54 seconds to the nursing home story. CBS Evening News produced only slightly more, 3 minutes, 11 seconds, while NBC Nightly News logged 4 minutes and 51 seconds of coverage. So over the last month, basically 10 minutes and 56 seconds were dedicated to the nursing home COVID death numbers. So compare that 10 minutes and 56 seconds to nearly as much airtime as those same broadcast companies devoted to covering Ted Cruz's ill-advised trip down to Cancun, Mexico. Within 4 days, they covered that story a total of 8 minutes and 51 seconds. So I mean, you can see that there's an active policy in place to try to suppress these stories. And like I said earlier, they try until it gets to the point where it's so obvious that they have nothing else to do but to cover it. And now they're all in. So if you were to ask them why they weren't covering the story today, they would say, well, we're all over it. But again, my point being is over the last month, several months, it has been anything but that. So, and then finally, at the end of this article, Noyes and D'Agostino, and obviously they're editorializing here, but they said, given the enormity of the consequences of Cuomo's foolhardily and duplicitous approach, the puny amount of news coverage is a scandal in and of itself. So it's definitely an obvious ploy by the mainstream media to run cover for Cuomo and the several scandals that he's currently embroiled in. And again, the same applies for the sexual assault allegations that have been levied against him. This was an article by Joseph Wolfson from Fox News, and the title of the article, CNN's Brian Stelter forced to address Cuomo's sex scandal after network delayed coverage of first accuser. And he goes on to say that on the CNN's Reliable Sources show, Stelter drew much of the focus on the bombshell report from the New York Times that outlined claims against Governor Cuomo from former aide Charlotte Bennett. However, Stelter avoided the essay published earlier in the week written by Lindsay Boylan, another one of the victims, which CNN ignored for nearly 24 hours after she went public with her allegations. So you can see that there is definitely a concerted effort to try to stop these stories. And my take on this particular situation with Governor Cuomo is, for basically all of 2020, the media was fawning all over Cuomo, and we all know this is well documented. He wrote a book, went on a book tour, all the TV shows. He also won an Emmy, I believe, for his TV appearances during his press conferences throughout this whole pandemic, and he was lauded as this model of leadership in times of crisis. And now, obviously, we're knowing that. They said nothing about the nursing home numbers cover up, and that only came out when his one of his staff members had that conversation with Democratic politicians from New York several weeks ago, where she basically admitted that we cooked the books because we didn't want the negative political fallout that was going to happen from that. So that's upsetting to me when you think about how much they had fawned over Cuomo, and then how much they tried to keep this thing under wraps until it was basically too late, and they couldn't do anything but to report on it. And it's I immediately thought of how the mainstream media, how they reacted with Stormy Daniels' attorney, Michael Avenatti. If you remember way back in, when that was a big deal in the early part of Trump's administration, Avenatti was the mainstream media's poster boy, to the point where some of those talking heads were actually talking about him as a potential candidate running for president, until obviously the whole world found out that the guy was really just a despicable person. And of course, then they had to drop him. But up until that point, the narrative was he was the Trump killer, and he needs to continue this and maybe take it on to the national political stage. Again, my take, at this point, it was anything that was anti-Trump, they were on board, and they were willing to run that narrative all the way until it was proven false. And then it also reminds me of how they handled the Hunter Biden case, or the investigation, not the case, the Hunter Biden investigation in the last month or so of the campaign before the election this past November. In both cases, they kept a lid on those stories for as long as they could to avoid any negative images or press. And that's basically censorship by omission. And in Hunter Biden's case, my take is that they put a lid on that thing so tight just to run out the clock, so that, in hopes that Biden would win, because if he did win, I believe everybody knew that story was just going to go away, and it looks like that has played itself out. You don't hear much about Hunter Biden and his issues anymore. And then finally, it was all done to protect the veneer and this is in Cuomo's case, that it was all done to protect the veneer that they had created around Cuomo. For what, I'm not sure. Maybe they wanted, at the time, they thought that he would ride that momentum and maybe seek higher office. I'm not sure, but it was a concerted effort. The narrative was there to prop him up as the leader that America so desperately needs. Either way, as the old saying goes, you can't put lipstick on a pig. And it seems that the long knives are out for him from all the people, political rivals and the political enemies, of all those people that he has made enemies of over the course of his political career. It seems like now that the cat's out of the bag and that the evidence seems overwhelming in both of these scandals. It seems that everybody's out to get him. So that's my take on Governor Cuomo and how the mainstream media has been handling his current situation. And number two, and I think this one's really important, and I've touched on it in the past, but I feel it needs to be addressed again, and I think it needs to be observed and talked about as much as possible whenever you see it happening, because I think this trend is extremely dangerous for the Republic and for our way of life and how we as Americans conduct ourselves. And that is the idea of freedom of speech, of the right to have an opposing opinion, the right to express that opinion. All of those things I feel like are in jeopardy right now. And again, it's an active push from the mainstream news outlets to get rid of cable news outlets, like I said earlier, Fox News, One America News Network, Newsmax. There's a push by the Democrats or the left to get rid of that dissenting opinion and to actually just remove it from the record. And I think that is extremely dangerous. There's a great article on February 22nd from the Daily Mail from Caitlin Corral. And it's titled "Democratic Representatives Writes Cable Companies, including AT&T and Comcast, and streamers Amazon and Hulu, demanding they drop Fox News, OAN, and Newsmax over misinformation." And this was primarily started from two Democratic politicians from California, Anna Eshoo and Jerry McNerney. Were demanding that those TV providers drop those channels from their cable packages. And their claim was that these right-wing news outlets served as misinformation rumor mills and conspiracy theory hotbeds. And to me, when you hear something like that, it is just the epitome of hypocrisy, and in my mind is also extremely dangerous. I mean, the left was all over Trump basically for all 4 years. Once he had labeled the mainstream media as fake news, they were all over him, calling him a fascist, for calling out anything he disagreed with, that it was un-American, that he was going after the First Amendment and the ability to promote dissenting opinions. And again, that's exactly what they're doing right now. These two politicians are doing that exact same thing that they, for the last 4 years, have been going crazy on Donald Trump for what he was doing, calling it fake news. It's just it's just flipped the gloves on the other hand at this point. I also think it's dangerous because they used and I put it in quotes, the insurrection on January 6th as their justification to remove all opposing viewpoints. And that's exactly what happened in Germany in the 1930s when the burning of the Reichstag building. They used that as a premise to basically stamp out any dissenting opinion, any dissenting view, any dissenting political party. I mean, they went, obviously, as you know, as everybody knows, they went completely off the reservation. But it all started with that, we need to get rid of it because it's dangerous. Well, who's to say that it's dangerous? And it's interesting because I actually we had a dinner party several weeks ago, and one of the guests, and we were having a great conversation, but he was on the opposite side of the aisle on pretty much every issue that we talked about. But basically what he said was he felt that that we needed an outlet that everybody can agree are the accurate facts or the truth, as he put it. And he just so happened to think that that truth, the guardian of truth, needs to be the New York Times. Well, okay. I don't think so. And I completely disagree with that. As a matter of fact, it probably should be a combination of them, of Fox News, other people, independent investigative journalists, because one side does not have the monopoly on the news. And there is always another side of the story. And again, that kind of goes back to my original reason for wanting to do Rainman's Take is you have to be as informed as possible so that you're not victim to the narratives that are being presented, and with that, the actions that that particular side is wanting their listeners to act on. Another great article that kind of goes along with this idea of censorship being dangerous. This was written. Where was it? It was today, came out today by Matt Tiabi on TK News. And the title of the article was In Defense of Substack. And if you don't know what Substack is, it's a group of independent journalists come together, and that Substack is sort of their platform where they can put in all of their research and all of their news articles that they have been writing. And before we go any further, I love reading Matt Tiabi. I love reading Glenn Greenwald, Sarah Carter, John Solomon. All of these independent journalists, I think, are doing great work out there. Now, in Matt's particular case, because this is an article that he wrote, he was no fan of Donald Trump. He hated that guy. But I enjoyed reading him because he was, generally speaking, pretty fair. If he saw something happening on either side, regardless of who the perpetrator was, red, blue, Matt always had a really good insight into what was going on. So whenever he comes out with something, I always read it. And so this particular article was very interesting. Again, it was called In Defense of Substack, and I found it on Zero Hedge, and I highly recommend you read it if you get the chance. But he was commenting, and he wrote his article commenting on the tweets from a UCLA professor, Sarah Roberts, who's the co-leader of the UCLA Center for Critical Internet Inquiry. Basically, the tone of her tweets was wanting to suppress the rise of independent journalists because they are not from one of the mainstream media outlets and therefore are not as trustworthy. And obviously, Matt took exception to that particular series of tweets. And this is a quote from one of her tweets, a direct quote. Substack is a dangerous, direct threat to traditional news media, but more importantly, is it a threat to journalism? And so here's my take. The rise of independent journalism is a good thing and is the result of the fact that the mainstream media has about the same low approval ratings as Congress right now. And I think the last time I checked, it was in the single digits. So that traditional kind of media platform doesn't really have much of a leg to stand on, in my view. And yet what they're researching and what they're writing about has generally been either dismissed by the mainstream media or completely ignored. And again, I think that's a dangerous thing, but it also, I have optimism because there is a certain rise of these independent journalists that are able to challenge what's going on in the mainstream media. And I'm just going to read a couple of quick quotes here from Tiabi, because I think they really hit home, and they really are. He says exactly what I'm thinking, and hopefully exactly what a lot of other people are thinking. Basically, he said, Greenwald and I got our starts as independents. He was a blogger and I edited for my own print newspaper. We both built substantial readerships on our own before being scooped up by traditional, and he has that in quotes, news organizations, in a process identical to the one Roberts denounces when done by Substack. So again, if it's not the mainstream media doing it, then something is not right and it doesn't deserve people's attention. The experience of independent media was where I first learned that audiences will read you not based upon how careful, read you or not, based upon how careful and accurate you are. So obviously, he's relying on his readers to build a impression of his work. And if he is trustworthy and has integrity, then of course they're going to read him, and of course he's going to be popular, which he is. To imply that trust is a thing that only can be conferred by a mainstream newsroom is beyond insulting, Tiabi writes. Why did a source like former NSA contractor Edward Snowden choose to come forward to Glenn Greenwald in particular? He surely wasn't bothered by the fact that Greenwald didn't come up through the ranks of a paper like the New York Times or the Washington Post. And the answer, he continues here, the answer connects to one of the primary reasons audiences are moving to places like Substack. The perception that traditional news outlets have become tools of the very corporate and political interests they're supposed to be overseeing. That's exactly what I've been trying to say with RAINMAN'S take is, there's a narrative out there. There is a definite agenda, and I don't think it's in the best interests of we as the citizens here. And then finally, he concludes, and I love this in his conclusion, this is a small island of pushback in a vast sea of hackery. And I'd laugh about it if I didn't know for certain that sooner or later, these petty Twitter outbursts and snarky features in places like the New Yorker will eventually turn into full-blown boycott campaigns to protect the poor artisans at shops like NBC, CNN, and the New York Times. It's coming, and we should all be prepared for it. Right there. It goes back to Benjamin Franklin when he said, only an informed citizenry can keep the republic that we've established. I highly recommend reading that article. If you get, I'll just leave off with this piece. One of the comments in the comment section of the article basically said it perfectly. Of course, they object to Substack. They object to any free and critical thinking and to any information whose flow they themselves don't control, meaning the mainstream media. They are a contemptible lot of authoritarian tools whose scorn should be worn as a badge of honor. Clearly, you and your cohorts at Substack are doing something right. Please keep it up. Funny, and I totally agree. The establishment media, again, is trying to suppress, censor, whatever name you want to call it, viewpoints that are not in line with the narrative. There's an active movement to suppress them, and using the laws, changing the laws of the United States, having politicians be at the forefront of that movement should concern every free-thinking, freedom-loving citizen in America. And then finally, just a quick word about the winter storm that just blasted through Texas and the ensuing energy debacle that took place there. Ron King from CNN a couple of weeks ago was describing the state of the power grid in Texas. And then he made sure to point out that it has been a Republican stronghold for so long, basically insinuating that the Republican government in Texas failed their citizens, and it was the fault of the administration. Now, it's funny because that struck me as almost identical to how conservative news outlets, Fox, how they would cover, say, the forest or the wildfires in California from last year, when they had the rolling blackouts, when the power grid was in jeopardy. Not only were they blaming the liberal, the longstanding liberal government in California, the words were almost identical. It was almost like they took the exact same script and just changed Democrat to Republican, and that struck me as very interesting. And again, my point: you got to listen to both sides because both sides have a narrative. So. Obviously, my take on how they treated the Texas weather situation with the power issues. Obviously, there's a lot more to the situation, and in both cases, both in Texas and in California, in Texas in particular, that's a once in a lifetime weather event that occurred that knocked down pretty much every source of energy in that state. But what is the implication when somebody like King or Fox News, when they imply that it's the fault of the particular government in place at the time? Texas conservative, California Democrat liberal. What are they implying that the other side could, what is each station implying that the other side could do better? And again, I don't know the answer to that. Maybe it's as simple as we just need better leaders, and we need to vote in people who actually can do the job. I don't know. The way it is now, all these stories do is divide our citizenry into one side or the other, and most people not even realizing that that's probably the main goal of the mainstream media anyways, to divide us with the stories and the narratives that are being pushed out there. Again, this goes back to my original premise, Rain Man's Take. You need to be looking at both sides of an issue. If you only watch one side and you agree with that side, essentially you're in an echo chamber, and that makes people very easy to manipulate, to be manipulated by the narrative that is being projected in that echo chamber. And again, that's on both sides of the aisle. When you get in a situation like that sometime, or when you're thinking about a certain issue sometime, try this as an exercise, because I found it to be a very interesting one. Ask yourself, what happens if I'm the one who's wrong? If my opinions are wrong and my outlook on what's going on here is wrong, what happens if I'm wrong? It gives you a chance to kind of pause and maybe reflect a little bit on how people on the other side of the coin are looking at that exact same situation. So try that sometime. And in the meantime, that is all I have for today's Raindrop. Thank you very much for watching. This is the Rain Man. Take care. Thanks for watching Rain Man's Take, observations on the world we live in. If you like the content, don't forget to hit the subscribe button below. You can also follow Rain Man's Take on Instagram at Rain Man's Take. Also, check out our website at www.rainmanstakepodcast.com and send your comments to rainmanstake@gmail.com. Keep an eye out for future podcasts, which will be coming out every Thursday at 5 p.m. West Coast time.